You have a really inspiring life story. Your folks didn't go to college. Can you just tell me about your childhood and where you found the love for physics and science, and maybe how you found your journey to become a physicist, given the context of where you came from?
Well, uh, I grew up a poor kid in the boondocks. Great parents, but not ones that could guide me terribly academically, but very nurturing. My mom would laugh that she could stop helping me math after like sixth or seventh grade. But they were supportive, and there were three things I think that folded into it. One is I was a voracious reader as a kid. I loved science fiction. I would read a book a day. It drove my mother nuts because she would try to be nice. She'd buy me a book and I'd say thank you. And the next day it'd be done. It just drove her completely nuts. But science fiction is good for fostering imagination. And so that's precisely what it did. In addition, and this is where the more serious science came along, there were lovely science communicators that were popular in the 1970s. Isaac Asimov, Carl Sagan, a guy by the name of George Gamow. They wrote books about science aimed at a layperson. As a kid, I surely couldn't read a textbook and understand it, but I could read and get a hint of what science was. And on top of that, I was, as most scientists, people who became scientists, irrepressibly curious about everything. And I had sort of a quasi-philosophical mind. I mean, I was interested in questions that have in the past been theological and then philosophical and now are more scientific. Questions about how did the universe come into existence? Why is the universe the way it is? Why are the laws of the universe what we see them to be? How will the universe, was it created? How will it be destroyed? These are, big questions that have bothered humanity for, well, thousands of years. And so, I did. You said I had, philosophy and religion minors in college, and I did because I was curious about that. I was hoping that learning that history might help me understand these questions. And it was in college where I came to realize that the answers that I were searching for were not to be found in those directions, but I still learned about how those questions have been asked in the past. And so I became a scientist. And the only question was I going to be a cosmologist slash astrophysicist
Mhm.
or a particle physicist? And when I had to make that decision, it was the mid 80s. And at the time, there were a lot fewer cosmology measurements. There was an awful lot of thinking about
Mhm.
the universe and not enough measuring. Whereas with particle physics, by God, you could do experiments. And so what attracted me was the ability to actually get an answer and not just mull over what an answer might be. And so I became a particle physicist. It was difficult without having, family mentors or anything like that, but I managed. And that actually is why, well, I'm here and why I've spent a fair bit of my time writing books and so forth, because I figure that there has to be some other kid out there in Iowa or Kansas, Montana, or somewhere out in some little town without a lot of access to the kinds of thing that people, you know, who have highly educated parents do. And I'm hoping that, some of them will have read some of the things I've written and will find their own path forward because I found it very rewarding over the years. And, I've been doing this long enough that I'm sure this is true. I've had kids come up to me at the lab and say, "Hey, I'm a summer intern because I saw your video or read your book or, whatever." So I know that at least I've made a small impact. I mean, I always would like to do more. And, I appreciate the opportunity that your audience affords me because I think it's important to talk about these things. These are really cool, fascinating questions. They are unanswered and they are just waiting for youngsters to come and spend some time thinking about them, because one of your viewers might be one of the people who answer these questions that have stymied very smart people for decades.
And we should also say that you're a legit scientist. So we'll mention Sean Carroll, who's a legit scientist, legit physicist, but is also a good science communicator. Anyway, I did want to mention, I don't know if this is true, but I kind of heard you talk about this, that when you first showed up to Fermilab, you were like working crazy hours, working extremely hard,
Mhm.
8 a.m. to midnight.
I did.
First of all, I love that.
Mhm.
Uh, can you speak to what drove you and maybe the value of hard work in those contexts in the early career when you discover a thing you're passionate about?
Well, yeah. I mean, obviously being smart, if you're Einstein, then maybe you can slack, I guess, although even he didn't do that, but I'm not Einstein. But the fact is, when I was young and I was unencumbered, no family, no kids or something, I couldn't imagine anything I wanted to do more. I mean, some people, they wanna go out to the club, they wanna, I don't know, play soccer or something, but I wanted to make measurements, and I wanted to understand and learn, and that was fantastic. And so as a graduate student, and this isn't for everybody, but I worked outrageously. I would, from Monday through Saturday, I would be at the lab voluntarily because I wanted to be, from 8 AM to midnight. And on Sunday, I would work from 8 until about 5, and that's because from 5 to midnight, I had to wash clothes and buy groceries and things like that. And I loved it, and I still love it. I can't do that anymore, but that's simply because I have other obligations. But had I been rich, I would have done the same thing.
Mhm.
It's something I truly, truly loved. And I mean, there is absolutely nothing more fascinating to me than having a hard problem and figuring it out. And that work ethic. Well, there's a couple of things that separate smart people from no kidding scientists, because all scientists are smart. But the thing that separates that many scientists have is a drive and a real grit.
Mhm.
The For me and for so many scientists that I know, trying to measure something and having it not work just kind of ticks me off. And I am not going to let the universe in my lab or whatever beat me. And, some people, if the thing breaks, it's like, oh man, that didn't work. And a lot of people, well, I'm going to go home. I'm fed up. Nah, it would just kind of make me mad. And I'd put more effort into it. And not every, I mean, okay, I was crazy. I worked long hours, but I think
Yeah.
the people who are really good at this will do maybe not that much, some people have to have a better life than that, but a lot, because it's just, you can't imagine not knowing the answer.
Mhm.
And that, if when you see that as an older guy, you don't, maybe not to that degree, but when you see that kind of drive, that that intensity of trying to get the answers, that person's a winner. And so if, some student out there, if it doesn't, bring you joy, as what's her name, the Japanese gal says, if it doesn't bring you joy, and it might not be for you. And then you could be a person who reads about it and, is involved. But if you want to be a real scientist, it it has to be just part of what you are here.
And by the way, it is a hard life, but it is also a very fulfilling one. So working hard towards the thing you love is a really fulfilling way to
Hmm.
be.
I think that's true for an artist or something, anybody, a musician, musician, they just keep practicing because it is who they are.
Mhm. Well, I'm glad there's people like you at a place I admire, like Fermilab, one of the many places in the United States and the world that is carrying the beacon of great science and great engineering forward. Don, thank you so much for everything you do, for all the teaching you do online, for all the incredible physics works that you do at Fermilab, and thank you so much for talking today.
Well, thank you for having me.